Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. It is week one. That means the NFL matchup show is back. That means we got football on tonight as we tape on a Thursday morning between the Dallas Cowboys and the defending Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. Greg, you work all year. You're grinding the tape. It's always football season for you, but this is the real thing, and I know you're fired up about it.
Yeah, hard to believe there's a real game tonight. For me, I'm really excited because, I've been over the last month, though, I've been watching a ton of NFL tape from a year ago in ways that I can't do during the season. But I'm really excited now to be able to see, regular season action and where it all matters. And what you're seeing, the schematics, the tactics, they're there for a reason. Not that they're not in training camp, but they're for totally different reasons in preseason games. Now it's for reasons that really matter.
Yeah, and there's games all over the board with huge implications right out of the gate, and it's
Yeah,
going to get started tonight in the NFC East, of course, and we'll touch on that game if you have any thoughts at the end of the podcast. But of course,
sure.
given that we're talking Titans and Broncos today, and we've been kind of working our way up to this Broncos preview, Greg, I know you're as fascinated about the tactics of this matchup as just about any
Sure.
game that we're going to
Yeah.
talk about today, and specifically with this. I'd like to start honestly with this Broncos offense, because what Bo Nix and Sean Payton were able to do together last year, I
Yeah.
really enjoyed it. But Nix led all rookies, 376 completions, 29 touchdown passes, 3,775 passing yards. What about the combination of Sean Payton's offense and Bo Nix's traits worked so well for them last year?
Well, Nix is a very interesting guy. Coming out of Oregon, and from when his years at Auburn, 3 years in the SEC. After that last year at Auburn, I don't think anybody even thought he was a draftable player, much less a top 12 pick in a draft. But Nick's at his best, and what he did at Oregon was very rhythmic. And that is really critical to a Sean Payton offense. It's very, very rhythmic, where the timing of the drops and the footwork have to match the and sync up with the routes. Now, theoretically, does every coach try to do that? There are some systems that are more reliant than that on others. And clearly, Sean Payton's system is very, very reliant on that. People can think back to Drew Brees being in Sean Payton's offense and how rhythmic it was. Rarely ever did you see Brees get stuck in the pocket where it seemed as if he had nowhere to go with the ball, and you saw that not as much. Obviously, Nix was a rookie, and he's certainly not at the level of Drew Brees. But that all ties in. It's the timing of the drops and the footwork. The footwork is critical with syncing up with the routes. Oddly enough, as I researched Bo Nix, and I watched a lot of tape this summer of Bo Nix, um, he had the third most third down dropbacks of any quarterback in the league. And I'm not sure people would think that. The two who were ahead of him with the most third down dropbacks were Caleb Williams, which one might expect, and oddly enough, CJ Stroud. Um, but uh, but there were a lot of third downs in the Denver offense, and Nix was pretty good on third down. Now, I think a couple of things that really stood out for a young player. I thought he did a pretty good job reading safety rotation. And that's one of the things that you have to be able to do in the NFL, which you don't see a ton of in college. I know a lot of people probably think, oh boy, you see it a ton in college because they probably watched the Texas game against Ohio State. And Matt Patricia obviously did a lot of safety rotation against Arch Manning, but he came from the NFL. So, that's that he's lived that world. But you normally don't see a ton of that in college football. Maybe you'll start to see more of it. But Nix did, I thought, a good job for a rookie. And the other thing that really stood out to me is he made arm strength throws at the intermediate levels of the field, both between the numbers and outside the numbers. He drove the ball with velocity. And my sense is, including myself, I'm not sure how many people thought he had that kind of arm strength. Those are arm strength throws, Buck, more than, let's say, throwing a post route. When you have to drive the ball between people at 20 to 25 yards, those are arm strength throws.
And it's going to be so interesting to see how they go about it this year in particular, Greg, because their rushing attack was not their strength last year. They struggled with that. They
Yeah,
bring in J.K. Dobbins, who was most recently with the Chargers. They draft R.J. Harvey in the second round.
yeah,
And their offensive line was remarkably healthy last year relative to, league average, I guess, which
Yes.
is going to be an interesting thing to see how they manage and how they are able to, if that's sustainable. Of course, health is so unpredictable in the NFL, no matter which team we're talking about. But as you look at the Broncos offense in particular, how much can they benefit from having an improved rushing attack? Because it was one of the least effective or efficient in the league last
Yeah,
year.
no question. And that's clearly why they brought in Dobbins. And Harvey was a second round pick. When you drafted back in the second round, you expect him to play and be a factor. And I liked his tape. So it'll be interesting to see how much he plays, what the division of labor is between Harvey and Dobbins. Because Dobbins, unfortunately, has been a little snake bit with injuries, but he's a good back. Um, the other interesting thing that they've done in the offense is obviously the receiving core. Cortland Sutton is still there. Marvin Mims, I'm sure they're counting on to be a little more than what he was a year ago. Very movable chess piece kind of player. Very good in the tunnel screen game, run after catch, has vertical ability. And now Troy Franklin has seemingly, everything I've read, he had a really good offseason, and we'll see. Obviously they played together at Oregon. Pat Bryant was their third round pick, a player out of Illinois that I really, really liked. Not a burner, but big, physical. I almost, feel like knowing Sean Payton that he probably sees him almost like a Marcus Colston within the context of how he, puts together and then schemes an offense. But this is a good offense. You've hit it. The key thing, can they run with more sustaining consistency? The run game doesn't have to be foundational in the sense that it all starts with there, and if they can't run, they can't play. But it needs to be a more sustaining element.
And obviously, the Titans on the defensive side of the ball are going to try and mitigate that as much as humanly possible with Jeff Simmons and Tavondre Sweat, who's back now fully healthy, Greg. They're really going to try and make sure, especially with the addition of so many big bodies, whether it's Jihad Ward up front or Draymond Jones, that is something that they're going to try and make that Broncos offense as
Yep.
one-dimensional as they can. And that's going to be the curious thing. Well, I guess from your standpoint, as you look at the matchup between Sean Payton's offense and Denard Wilson's defense, what kind of jumps off the page to you, or where are your underlying questions as we talk about who may be available? L'Jarius Sneed is on the injury report, but it seems like they're cautiously optimistic about him in week one.
Yeah, I think the key question is the third downs that I mentioned. There will be third and long plays in the game, and I think you'll find out early how Denard Wilson feels about his back end, and particularly the corners. And again, Sneed, we don't know. Like you say, we're doing this on a Thursday morning. We don't know even if he's active and playing, whether he's playing 20 snaps or 60 snaps. I guess we don't know the answer to that question. But I think you'll find out fairly early because, Denard Wilson does by nature want to be aggressive. And you always are a little leery of being aggressive if you don't feel really comfortable about your corners. So we're going to find out early how Denard Wilson feels. If all of a sudden we see that he's rushing four or doing what we call sim pressures, where you still rush four, but you might bring a linebacker and drop out at D lineman. In other words, a four-man rush. If he ends up with four-man pressures, then we know that he's not super comfortable with what he has on the back end at the corner position. If he really starts bringing five and at times six because he understands how they're going to protect, then you know that he feels that his corners can match up and play. So I think we'll find out. You'll probably have a sense of that through the first quarter, certainly by mid-second quarter, of how Denard Wilson feels about his defense and what he thinks they can get accomplished. And so much of that is situational. And that's why teams and coaches on defense study protection schemes so hard. Because contrary to what many might believe, Buck, you're not just blitzing a quarterback, you're attacking protections. You have a sense of how a team protects, and you're attacking the protection.
With speaking of corners that can match up and play, I mean, my God, the Denver Broncos, Pat Surtain, the
Yeah.
reigning defensive player of the year. You got Riley Moss on the other side, and you'll now have the rookie out of Texas in the who expects to be their nickel corner. It
Yeah,
seems
Janae Barron. Yep.
Jahdae Barron and Jaquan McMillan is also there as well. We know that this defense led the league in sacks last year, Greg. We know that they were number one in efficiency against the rush. So they were
Yeah.
putting opposing
Good
offenses
defense.
in
Yeah.
bad situations, able to tee off. This is going to be a huge, we've talked about this as a homework game for Cam Ward, the new look offensive line, and the Titans offensive coaching staff across the board. And Alec Iamander, Greg, for what it's worth, has been announced as a
Yeah,
starter, the fourth round rookie out of Stanford. They've been optimistic about him all through training camp. I know, I'm sure you're familiar with that after you're spending so many weeks
yeah.
here
Oh, yeah.
as you did in the offseason program. But this is as curious a matchup as I think you might find anywhere in football this week.
Yeah, and I think that this is a really difficult defense. Now, they clearly do specific things. Their base defense is a 5-2. So they have a five-man front with two stack backers. Obviously many call it a 3-4, but it's a five-man front. Now behind that 5-2, they predominantly like to play quarters coverage. Okay, so they played the fourth highest percentage of quarters coverage behind their base defense of any team in the league. So they're predictable in the sense that you know what you're going to get. Doesn't mean it's easy to break down. Now, what this team does, both in their base and in their pressures, when they go to their nickel, is they very often line up with five-man fronts. Okay, and what that does is it creates one-on-one matchup, not only for their edge pass rushers, but also for their inside players. And on the inside, they have Zach Allen, they have Franklin Myers. These guys can win one-on-one matchups. But keep one thing in mind. If you're going to rush five, then you have six in coverage. So what they do is they play a lot of sort of zone match concepts. It'll look like man at times, but it's not pure man in a strict sense. It's match. And it's the term that's often used for these kinds of concepts is match, carry, deliver. So you might match in an area, you carry the receiver to a certain point, then you deliver him to another defender who then matches him. So it's really a zone-based principle, but it has man match elements to it. So they do that a lot because they rush five and they demand that your offensive line be able to pass protect 101. That's so you've got some critical matchups here. You've got Benito, who almost always lines up at right defensive end. He's going to be up against Dan Moore. Okay, that's going to happen. Then you're on the other side, what you're going to get is you're going to get the fact that Cooper, who's a really good pass rusher, is going to go up against Latham. So keep in mind that Cooper lined up on the left side of the defense 89% of the snaps. Benito lined up on the right side on over 75% of the snaps. So those are the matchups that are going to be critical here. And what they do with their fronts, Buck, is they create those one-on-ones.
And speaking of matchups, obviously for the Titans, it's going to be, we know what the Titans have, right? It's Calvin Ridley and Tony Pollard as proven commodities in this offense. And we know that Vance
Right.
Joseph is going to key on those two in particular, especially given that Tajay Spears won't be available for not just this game, but the first four games as he's on injured reserve, Greg. So that figures to be a heavy workload for Tony Pollard again, unfortunately for him. And they'll do what they can to take away Calvin Ridley and try and see if Lockett or
Yeah.
Iamander or whomever else might get snaps in this game. It's not just going to be about the three of them, of course. Nick Holtz, who I know you've obviously spent some time with, talked about
Yeah.
this week and how they're going to move Calvin around the formation and try and find different ways to exploit those matchups as they become available, because no matter what your draft pedigree is or where you came from as a college player, in the case of Iamander, you're a professional wide receiver. They're expecting you, if you get one-on-one matchups that are favorable, that you go out there and win those. It's going to be critical for them, of course.
It'll be interesting because Sertan is not a pure matchup corner. Are there games and situations where he will match up to a quality wideout? Yes, but predominantly they do not match him up. He doesn't just travel as an automatic thing. So it'll be interesting to see one what the Titans do with Calvin Ridley, who's clearly their best wideout and one of the better ones in the league. And I'm sure they will move him around, and they'll see how the Broncos decide to play it, because they'll feel good. They'll feel good if it's Ridley versus Riley Moss, who was up and down last year, but I think has the traits to be a quality corner. The one thing you will see is you're going to see a lot of disguise and late movement with the coverage look changing at the snap. So the way we often talk about this is the pre-snap element and the post-snap phase. And the pre-snap is not going to be what you get post-snap. and that'll be the challenge for Cam Ward and for the receivers as well. It's not just Cam Ward, but that will be the challenge.
I'm fascinated to see how it goes, Greg. I'm shipping out to Denver on Saturday morning, and we'll take in that game and certainly have a lot of interesting notes and try. People overreact to everything that they see, and week one is always a curiosity that way with the extremes that people go to. But it's gonna be pretty telling, I think, in
Yeah,
a couple of different things that you
yeah.
pointed
Well,
out here about who this
just
Titans
look for
team
that.
is.
Yeah, I mean, you want to look for a couple things. And just to finish up, they gap you out so you get one-on-one matchups with their edge pass rushers. And then there's going to be late coverage rotation with disguise. So that's essentially what you're going to see, particularly when you get into passing situations.
Now we get to the rest of week one. Now, obviously, tonight's game is not on the matchup show. And of course, as we get back into the swing of things for football season, you can catch the matchup show live on Saturday mornings. You can set your DVR and watch it on demand. You can also catch it in the ESPN app on demand as you please. But this Cowboys team, without Micah Parsons, Greg, we talked about it last week as soon as we taped,
Yeah.
Micah Parsons was going to get traded. And
Yeah.
sure enough, that was the case. I can't imagine the sigh of relief that the Philadelphia offensive coaching staff is breathing, knowing that they don't have to deal with Micah Parsons in this game.
Well, it's funny. The Eagles last year, they ran the ball on first down more than any team in the league. On third and 4 yards to 8 yards to go, they ran the ball far and away more than any team in the league because they go for it on fourth down. But in this particular game, given that the Eagles offense basically has no changes, the only change you could ideally say is Steen at right guard has replaced Becton, but Steen started some games last year. He's not a new player. Otherwise, everybody's the same. The Cowboys on defense have a lot of changes. I think you're going to see the Eagles come out with no huddle and throw the ball, believe it or not, because I think that they're going to feel that with all the changes the Cowboys have, not only the personnel, but a new coordinator and Matt Eberflus. So there's a lot of moving parts with the Cowboys defense. It would not surprise me at all if the Eagles came out aggressively and threw the ball early and really tried to go ahead, 17-0, 20-3, and really put the game on Dak Prescott's shoulders. And I watched a ton of Dak Prescott before he got hurt last year. And quite frankly, Buck, I didn't think he looked very good. I'm not going to go into the weeds now, but I
Yeah.
overall I did not think he looked very good.
So many good games across the board, whether they be divisional games out the gate. We've got a few with some interesting storylines that obviously we don't necessarily dive into, like Steelers at Jets with Aaron Rodgers in the mix here. The Ravens at the Bills, Greg, I'm certain is on the matchup show as Sunday Night Football, though,
Oh
this
yeah,
week.
that's our featured game, and obviously a Monday night game, Minnesota Chicago is with the two quarterbacks is big, but that'll be a fun one, I'm sure.
With Baltimore, we understand how effective and efficient their offense was last year, and that they're returning the vast majority of parts, even a familiar face in DeAndre Hopkins, who is going to work into the rotation in the Baltimore wide receiving core as well. For the Baltimore offense against the Buffalo Bills defense, I guess what piece are you focused on the
Yeah.
matchup show for that game?
Well, there's a couple of potential things for the Bills here. Number one, the Bills knew that they needed to get better rushing the quarterback, and that's why they made the moves they did in the offseason with Bosa and with some draft picks. And because Sean McDermott, he's a selective blitzer, not a high percentage blitzer, and they would love to be able to rush with four, and particularly in this game because they could be missing their corners. We're doing this Thursday morning. Tre'Davious White might not be able to play. Bedford might not be able to go. We'll see who's going to line up at corner for the Bills. So, that's something to watch in this game is, who's going to be on the outside. We know the Ravens are going to run the ball. You obviously have to deal with that. And Lamar is a major, major part of the run game, just like Jalen Hurts is a major part of the Philly run game. And both these teams are really efficient with their offenses because the quarterback being that factor really changes the way you have to play defense. So, I'd be anxious to see with Buffalo, be curious to see, if they can rush the quarterback. You have to rush differently versus Lamar and what their corner situation is. They played in the divisional playoffs last year, and it was a very odd game, Buck. Obviously, the Bills won, but Josh Allen threw for less than 130 yards. I
Yeah.
can't imagine the game's going to play out the way this time.
Yeah, it's that's going to be one of the most exciting games on the board
Yep.
this weekend. Now, you mentioned the Vikings and the Bears, Greg, and both of those teams are curiosities on offense this year, with, of course, Ben Johnson coming over from Detroit to work with Caleb Williams, and then J.J. McCarthy being in Kevin O'Connell's offense. Basically his rookie season, given that he was injured and missed all of the 2024 season. As you understanding that there are some unknowns here, what curiosity or what piques your curiosity about these two teams specifically to their offenses?
Yeah, I think for me with Caleb Williams, and I don't know if how many people listening got to see the NFL quarterback show that we do. Um, this year this one had Burrow, Goff, and Kirk Cousins. And at the beginning of episode 3, there were 5 to 7 minutes of all three quarterbacks talking about everything that happens before the ball's even snapped for a quarterback, which I don't think a lot of people think about. We can all look at Caleb Williams, and he's one of the 5 prettiest throwers of the football in the league. He's a beautiful thrower of the football. But the one thing about a Ben Johnson offense is the play calls can be wordy. Oftentimes there's 2 plays called, there's alerts, then there's shifts and motions when you get to the line of scrimmage. So all this happens before the ball snapped. That's what we call the operational part of playing quarterback. That to me is the number one thing that Caleb Williams has to master, because that's Ben Johnson's offense. Ben Johnson doesn't want to have to cut down his offense, so that that's something to look for early when Caleb Williams gets to the line of scrimmage. How much time's left on the play clock? Or will he decide early on, just to get Caleb comfortable in the game, to maybe even go to some no huddle, just to get him comfortable in the game? So that's something I would look for, because that operational part, that's not an easy deal. Fans don't think about that. A play happens and all of a sudden the coach is in the quarterback's ear. The quarterback could have a really crappy play, and then the coach is right in you've got to forget about that. You're on to the next play.
Yeah,
You know, that's the
yeah.
way it works.
It's such a it's why any criticisms from people watching from afar are always funny to me, because there is no more difficult position, I would argue, anywhere
Uh,
in sports than NFL quarterback, given the level of detail.
and that's something you think about with Cam Ward. And we've been around him and we know that he's got basically a flatline personality, but that's a critical piece. There's going to be bad plays against Denver. Now, you hope they're not turnovers, but there's going to be bad plays. And then you just have to forget about it, because all of a sudden he's going to have Brian Callahan in his ear telling him about the next play. And
Yeah.
and you can't worry, makes a misread or he gets sacked or, whatever happens. There's going to be bad plays. You just have to accept that, and you
His
just have to move
response
on.
his response about that yesterday, just kind of, trying to avoid putting the ball in harm's way, what I thought was pretty on brand, Greg. He said something like, I don't think there's ever been an NFL quarterback to play with a turnover-free season, so you can't dwell too much on it. You just have to move
No,
on.
and the thing is you don't want to step away from having to make the throws that are necessary to make. Sometimes when quarterbacks, which is one reason why with young quarterbacks, coaches try to give them, relatively speaking, or easy completions early on, because all you want to do, and I remember Phil Simms telling me this years ago, he said, "Hey, I just wanted to complete balls to start the game. I didn't care if they went for 3 yards, because you don't want to be 1 for 7, because then you think you can't complete a pass." And then he said that's not a good feeling.
Well, Greg, I'm so excited to just get this underway, to get another season going, to actually be able to react to things that we see on the field that have meaning, that have consequence, that have tendencies attached to them. And I know you're looking forward to it as well. Enjoy tonight in the Philadelphia area. I'm sure the place is going to be buzzing when they
I'm sure
unfurl
they're
the
tailgating
championship
as we
banners.
speak. Yeah, they're tailgating as we speak. I'm sure, Buck. You know how that goes.
It probably started yesterday, I would imagine, for some
Yesterday,
of
they
them.
probably started 5 days ago.
Well, that's good energy. We love to see it, and I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to seeing how it all plays out both tonight and into the weekend, of course. And we'll be back next week to react to all of it here on the install. We're excited. If you're new to the podcast, thanks for hanging out with us. Make sure you subscribe. If you're hanging out on YouTube, like the video as well. Greg and I are here with you each and every Thursday morning to get you ready for another week of the NFL season. Of course, we're here all year long talking football. Buddy, looking for our 5th season together, Greg. You've been
Is
carrying my
this
ass around for 5 years at
is
this
this
point.
is this season 5 already?
How crazy is that, bud? We've been
Gee,
at this a long time.
I can't. That's crazy. I can't believe that. Does it? Hey,
Yeah,
I guess that's good. It's gone fast.
I know it's been a huge burden on you, Greg, but I appreciate your patience as always.
Hey,
Thank
well,
you,
I'm not
buddy.
the one. I'm not the one traveling to Europe.
We got a jet set. You can't tell me nothing after the private flights anymore, Greg. But
Right, right,
that's
right.
that's for another podcast. See you next Thursday, buddy.
All right.